Yo, what's good? My name is Riley, and welcome to my channel, Zavala Hobbies. Now, this video is kind of like a pseudo start to a series, I guess you could call it, where I'm primarily going to talk about all the different armies that I currently own and actively collect, I should say. But to kind of get things started, to kick things off, I thought, why not talk about my own origins, the beginning to my Warhammer journey, which quite some time. I think I've been part of this hobby for, wow, like almost literally 20 years, since I was like really really young. And let's take it back, to the summer of, I think it was like maybe 2001, was when my brother first got into Warhammer. And it was him and my dad. They were, I believe they were like going back to school shopping or something, and they ran into a Games Workshop in the mall that we were in. And I believe they had the giant, like, life size Space Marine statue outside, and I think that's what that caught their attention. So they went in, started talking to the workers, and watching the people play in the demonstrations. And I'm assuming the rep was like, spot on with his pitch, because my brother at the time would have been like, I think maybe 13 or so. And so he got hooked on 40K. I believe they were demoing some 40K stuff. So they actually ended up buying, like, right then and there, the In the Grim Darkness box set, if I remember correctly, which was the Dark Eldar, or Drukhari now, and the Space Marines, which I believe my brother kind of went with Templars, but I don't know. They didn't really go by factions. They just thought it was really cool. Now, at this point, my brother took the Space Marines, my dad took the Dark Eldar, and that's kind of what they had. And I still have them. I actually made a short video on my TikTok where I found the boxes again, and it's really cool to see all, like, old models from way back when. These models are older than my sister is at this point, and so it's really fun to, like, see everything from when I was younger. Like, we have a bunch of stuff from when the very first Lord of the Rings sets came out, and even some, like, what's it called, old terrain. Like, there's this old castle that we have that I don't have with me, sadly. It's still at my brother's, and I'll eventually pick that up from him. But that's something that we never even primed. Like, it's still gray plastic that we never really actually used. So I definitely want to pick it up and try using that after that. But eventually, after they got that initial box, they picked up some additional things, like some Dark Eldar Reavers, like 2 Raiders, and for the Space Marines, if I remember correctly, they got, like, the little land speeder, some more, or some, not more, but the assault troops for Space Marines, the ones with, like, the jetpacks, and then a really really cool, like, fully metal cast dreadnought, which my brother actually ended up painting in Ultramarines colors, which I still think is really funny because everything else is in black. Um, but those Space Marines were technically also the first units I ever painted, because my brother let me paint, like, a couple of them here or there, or later on down the line when he wasn't really into it, like, I just kind of stole them and painted them. And boy howdy, let me tell you, don't let an 8-year-old paint. I mean, it took me years to get to any kind of decency, but by this point, I believe it was like a year or so after, maybe 2002, 2003 ish, when the time for fantasy kind of came along for us. One of my brother's friends, who basically, got us even more solidified into Warhammer, specifically fantasy. He was collecting fantasy, collecting orcs and goblins. And so at that time, my brother decided to join in, because now he had someone else to play with, not just my dad, who at the time, doesn't have a whole lot of time to spend building and painting and playing, nonetheless. But so he ended up picking up the 6th edition starter set, I want to say it was, and it was Orcs and Empire. My brother ended up sticking with the Empire, which he kind of, started building more on it. He got, like, great swords. He got, like, pistoliers. and I believe he even picked up additional swordsmen, militiamen, and some knights too. So, you know, he had a lot. Sadly, they technically not all of it's finished to this day. You know, life happens, and I believe most of it's built. They're just not like fully fastened together. Like he didn't ever like actually glue his knights down to his horses, except for like one dude, and you know most of them are still gray plastic. So there's that. I don't even know if his great swordsmen are actually good to go, but you know that was like 2002, and things didn't kick off for me until 2007, which is when I got my first army, and the collection has spiraled since then. If you've ever seen any of my posts on any of the socials, like you know how much stuff I have. It's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, my very first army, 2007, dwarves. So the dwarves were my introduction to Warhammer, and I picked up on them because for some reason I was just super into like dwarven characters in fantasy genres. You know, watching Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers is my like one of my favorite films, mainly because of the jokes between Gimli and Legolas. Um, and you know, I love quoting them sometimes. And then playing a Dark Alliance, the first game, I played the dwarf character, and there's an ability called Bull Rush that I remember playing with my brother so frequently that that's all I used was just I would just spam it. But you know, what's a kid to do? So yeah, dwarves were my very first introduction, and I loved it. You know, I was probably like 8-ish, 9-ish, 10-ish. I don't know how time works. And I wanted to join in on the fun because you know my dad's in it, my brother's in it, you know our friend was in it, and I really wanted to partake. So that year they finally caved and they got me the Dwarf Battalion box, which if I can find some old photos of it or like the classic photos, I'll put them on the screen. But I believe it was like a bunch of different units, some warriors, some handgunners, a slayer. I want to say like it was a lot. It was a really cool amount. And at the same time, or right around the same time, our friend actually had just gotten the Battle for Skull Pass box, and he doesn't use the dwarves. So he ended up giving that half to me and kept the goblins. And boom, I had like a full army ready to go. There were more warriors. There were some thunderers, miners, an additional cannon. I had like an organ gun, I want to say it was called, and then an additional thane. And oh no, the Slayer came from that box. So I think I just had like a normal thane in the battalion box. But after that, I remember picking up a few things. Like I had some hammerers and some iron breakers, which I did a really dumb thing, and I basically just coated them in lead belcher because I was like, oh, iron breakers, you know, silver, blah blah blah. It looks bad. I have them, and let's just say I plan on getting a sonic cleaner to fix that issue. You know, kind of get rid of some stuff, and then you know put some better paint on it. Especially now that I have the focus and control to, you know, actually do some things there. But yeah, I played the dwarves for quite some time. I think I actually only ended up playing like 2 or 3 games in that entire span. To me, this hobby kind of always stemmed for the creative side of things, building and painting. Around that time, well, actually, I don't remember specifically when, but like I said, mentioned earlier, we actually got that very first Lord of the Rings box. So it had like goblins, and I want to say it was not Rohan, the Gondor swordsmen and elven archers. So yeah, we had that box. I don't think we ever actually painted those either. I'm pretty sure if I open that old box with all those things in it, only like a few of them are primed, and only maybe one has actual paint on it. Everything else is still gray. And yeah, of course that's because they didn't let me prime anything. It would have to be my brother and my dad. But you know, the hobby's expensive. It's an expensive hobby to get into. So if you're not able to dedicate the time and patience and the money to it, you know, it stops a lot of people from you know really wanting to dive in. And that's kind of what happened to my family. You know, we got busy. By this time, you know, my sister was born, so my parents were, you know, busy, you know, raising her. My brother got into high school, started focusing on more things, you know, trying to figure out what was going on next. And then there's me, just me being me, chilling, vibing, wanting to do things creative, you know, and that ended up stemming into the next army, which I'll have a whole another video on. But um, yeah, this whole hobby has always been a very like do what you enjoy. You know, I didn't get into this to necessarily play. Like that was part of it in the very beginning. But once I actually got my hands on building, painting, you know, even though it was bad seeing how good you can get, you know, watching my brother's friend get, you know, really good with it. I've always been surrounded by artistic people, so I was really inspired to want to contribute to something, you know. And that's kind of what I do now. I made this channel specifically to not just talk about Warhammer, but to talk about all the hobbies that I have and to give people that means to that like sense of community to come together to talk about their hobbies, you know? Like I play D&D, I also play the Star Wars tabletop role playing game. I have the books for Call of Cthulhu. I read so much fantasy. You know, one of my favorite series right now is The Witcher. I'm reading like all the books. I'm almost done. And, you know, I've always been a fan of video games and I play them constantly. Not as much now, sadly, but, you know, I love the Final Fantasy games. I love Fallout. Fallout's like one of my favorite. And films and TV shows are like, I live and breathe, you know? And so I love talking to people about them. That's why I have my podcast, Up to Four Players. It's that excuse to just sit with someone or sit with friends and talk about the things we enjoy and just kind of, you know, speak about whatever it is that's on our minds, whether it be a current topic or just something that we saw or just a ridiculous story. It's all fun. That's what this is all meant to be. And that's what life is all about, is just having fun and enjoying things and just putting yourself out there in a way that draws people in, because that's what this hobby is. That's what Warhammer is it's really hard to get into unless you know somebody. And even more so now, especially with way social media is, you know, seeing all these really good artists and painters, you know, with their minis, seeing celebrities getting into it as well, showing off their nerdy side, playing D&D and all that. It definitely can make the hobby feel very closed off and hard to breach. But if you know friends who are into it, or if you are the friend that's into it and you want people to be more into it, start talking to them about it. And that's how this spreads. That's how this becomes more than just you sitting in your room painting on your own. Like, maybe you enjoy it. It's very cathartic for me. It's very calming to just put on like an episode of Critical Role and just paint for a few hours. But I also enjoy that sense of community, that sense of camaraderie, to be able to sit with people, play board games, play a tabletop game, just talk about what your idea is. Like, shoot, you know, whatever you want to do, you can do it. And that's the nice thing about this hobby too, is, you know, there's so many different things that you can do with it. If you want to play, you just have to build them. You know, you don't need to paint. You can go into almost any shop and they'll be perfectly fine for you to not have any paint on them, because people want you to play. I think the only time you're ever really required to is if you're trying to join a tournament. I think that's the only time that you're actually required to have paint on your models and, you know, be very specific and uniform or anything like that. But shoot, I know so many people and so many, you know, artists who actually paint these models specifically for display. And if that's something you're into as well, do it. I wish I could do that. I don't have the skill yet. That's my goal at one point, is to be able to take one model, just one model, and paint it in a way that I can put it on display proudly in my home and just be like, yeah, look at that, I painted that. But honestly, yeah, this hobby, these things in general are something that we should share, you know, because, for example, I'll plug myself a little bit. This is my little logo for my clothing brand, Zavala Creative. And the whole premise of that as well is just to bring people together to create and to showcase their own personality and flair through, you know, either a physical form of art, through, you know, the podcast, through whatever it may be. That's what I want to do. So if that sounds interesting to you and you've stuck through this video to this very end point, you know, make sure you follow us on all of our socials, and you subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and let's have a conversation. You know, leave a comment talking about some stuff that you're into, or your own like introduction and origin into Warhammer, and what your first army was, or your introduction to whatever other hobby there is. D&D, if you ever got into any kind of really good board games. You know, I love the, what is it, haunted, shoot, I always mess this name up. It's the house Betrayal at the House on the Hill, I think is what it's called. I love that game, and I only recently got into it. And you know, it can come from anything. So whatever it is you're into, let's talk about it, because I'm more than happy to learn and to explore and to just share with others. But yeah, until next time, we'll talk about that second army, which chaos. I'll leave it at that. I'll see you guys.